All right, so the draft is next week. So we've done our second edition of our mock draft. Actually, I said we, but it's actually all Mitch Keating here. So Mitch, welcome. What is the difference between the second edition of your mock draft and your first one that we did last week?
Yeah, the first one was just an initial look, maybe what some clubs will be looking at with each pick, not doing any trades and just looking at the order itself and how the first round might unfold. This one is kind of looking at an alternative universe, and if they're weighing up one or two prospects, we'll head down the other avenue and then see the ripple effect that it has for a few of the other clubs who would be looking at the same prospects or being able to have access to a one that wasn't available at their pick in our first mock draft. This one's also included live trades, although we've really only looked at one in particular. There certainly could be more on draft night as there were on 2023. Plenty broke out as the night unfolded, and I think that'll be the case again this year, but very hard to predict some live trades, especially with some of the clubs that have first round picks for next year and how they might try and get access again to this year. But yeah, this one, just a different look, some new names. There might be some double ups from the first one. It's still taking into account, if a really good player is there and he's going to be the standout for one club the same time around, then I wouldn't have thought they would be overlooking certain prospects.
Yeah.
So there are some double ups, some guys who would go to the same club at a different pick. But yeah, just a fun little exercise to steer clear from the first one.
Love it. All right. So the first one was a big success, so this should be good. Let's take a look at the draft order. So actually, we're not looking at it because you know it off the top of your head, but do you see this changing much on draft night?
Yes, as flagged, I think there'll be a few live trades, but on top of that, the match bids are the big ones. So what we have is 23 picks will probably blow out to 26 or 27. So you've got Levi Ashcroft, Isaac Kako, Leonardo Lombard, Sam Marshall. Ben Camporelli would be a maybe. I'd say unlikely, hence doesn't pop up in our mock drafts, but certainly couldn't rule it out. But I'd say about 27 picks, which is what we have in our mock draft. But yeah, on top of that, live trades. So you're looking at to GWS trade their way up, to Richmond potentially move for pick 2, to Melbourne or St Kilda look to get creative at all. And then on top of that, you look at North Melbourne, do they use their future first round? Do Essendon trade back in with their pair of first round picks? West Coast are in a similar position. So there are a lot of clubs that will be keen to get in. It's more about the clubs that are happy to trade themselves out or back and maybe split a selection here or there. So yeah, very different, but max maybe 27 picks.
Yep. 27 picks in the first round. That's just such a crazy number. All right, so let's jump into it with the first pick. Okay, so this time around, second edition, pick 1, still Richmond, Sam Lawler.
Yeah, this is, by a lot of accounts, this is one of the two that they're really weighing up at pick 1, Sam Lawler or Finn O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan, I went with in our first mock draft. And then this one, as is the nature of the count, we're looking at who else they could take. And Lawler's one who's been heavily talked about. He's probably not in that that first 3 or 4 names personally, but you do give some weight to there's some strong reports that the Tigers are keen. And why wouldn't they be? Where's number 4? Powerful, strong, bullish midfielder who models his game off Dusty. I think he's got a better maybe defensive side to his game than what many would see in Dusty. So you look at maybe a Petrarca as a more clearer comparison. But as far as upside, so he might not be like I said in my top couple of names, but upside he's probably number 1 in that regard. In that those few midfielders who are right at the top of the tree. So Richmond, they'll have a fair few selections to get through. Number 1's going to be a really big one. And Lawler's going to be a great chance for them and fills a list need for the long haul and hopefully can have a career half as good as Dusty's was.
Yep. So pick 2, Richmond this time, traded from North Melbourne, and we're going with Finn O'Sullivan.
Yeah, so we flagged live trades will happen. And this is going to be quite an interesting one if it does. Now, I think Richmond are in a position where they very well could be weighing up Lawler and O'Sullivan at pick 1. And if it's really line ball, then I think there's certainly a smart road to go down where they trade up to pick 2. You're probably involving pick 6 in that and one of their later first round picks, which I think in this case we've used pick 18. There certainly could be some other picks involved that kind of please both parties if one side's leaning the other. And I think North Melbourne, as we mentioned in our mailbag last week, would likely be the one that's pushing this more. But if you are Richmond, you should be open to it if you're really, really can't decide on who you want to take at pick 1. So you get the top 2 and you get 2 very different midfielders. And O'Sullivan is, as we've spoken about, such an all-round gifted athlete. And like Lawler had an injury hit year, which might be of some concern when a few fans are looking up his stats from this year. But a high impact player, classy, powerful, can score well from the engine room. And yeah, will be a very, very nice recruit if he lands at Richmond or whatever club. If the Tigers don't look at pick 2 and then North Melbourne stay, then O'Sullivan could be one that goes to the Kangaroos. He'd have some interest from Carlton, and it'd be hard to see him getting past Adelaide at pick 4 or so. So yeah, he's going to be a nice one for whoever. And then, like I said, in this case, Richmond are weighing up a couple names, and why wouldn't you just go for both with the capital they've got, and they're still going to have 5 other selections or so.
Yeah, I think they're going to come away from this draft with a pretty good hand regardless. All right, so pick 3, we're predicting Carlton to bid on Ashcroft, but obviously Brisbane, Levi Ashcroft at pick 3. Match father-son bid.
Yeah, so obviously in our last mock draft, we had North making that bid, and then given that they traded out a pick 2 and Richmond might pass on him for the second time, then it would be hard to see him going past Carlton. Just given, I think what we also mentioned last week was that the Blues want to get probably a few of those lines picks chewed up as quickly as they can. Just means that they would have to use as most as they would need, and then ideally that their second selection at pick 38 would come up a few spots, hopefully, and then that falls before a Ben Camporelli bid for the Blues. So it's something that Carlton would keep in mind, but at the same time, I've said for the last few months, I think Ashcroft's the number 1 player in this pool. So if Richmond aren't wanting to bid on him and don't have him at the top, then Carlton certainly could, and they'll be forcing that bid for Brisbane. Obviously, a player we've spoken about a lot this year, given his ties to the club, and we've known he'll be a Lions player for some time, but still just so dominant. Entered the year as arguably the number 1 pick, and yeah, while he might not go number 1 overall, as I mentioned, I think he's the top player in the draft. Just perfect year, just about for Vic Metro, for the Sandy Dragons, and even his 1-game stint for the Lions VFL side. Great accumulator, smart player, clean hands, good leadership qualities, and still different to his brother, which I think is nice. Like, it'd be great to have another Will Ashcroft, but I think Levi's going to have his own kind of road to go down, and he's going to offer a point of difference. Less pace and speed, but just very smart in and under player who can learn a lot off a player like Lachie Neale.
Yeah. So is there any point in Richmond bidding on Ashcroft with the first pick?
Oh, yeah, plenty of pros in Richmond's regard. They probably force the reigning premier to give up more than what they would at pick 2 or 3 or whenever the bid would follow. At the same time, and I don't think a lot of clubs would look at this too much, but you're putting the pick 1 pressure on another kid, not your own. So, there's the amount of pressure that pick 1 gets compared to pick 2 is massive. And I think, not placing that on your own player it might be, in some people's eyes, a benefit as well. So that's among the pros on why you would bid, but unlikely that we'll see one from Richmond, at least at pick 1.
All right, so Carlton slide down to pick 4, and now we're taking Sid Draper, Adelaide boy.
Yeah, so Blues, this will be a name that they'll certainly look at with their opening pick. Finn O'Sullivan's the other one that we've mentioned a fair bit, and again, in this case, he's not available to them even as early as they are in the draft. And they took Jagger Smith in the last mock draft. So this is one that just looks at a different avenue, and they get a nice speedy midfielder who can be a fitting addition to, I think, the kind of magnets they've got in midfield at the moment under Michael Voss. Good senior experience, but I wouldn't expect Draper to be playing straight away. I think the mix that Carlton have got at the moment, they have some guys who have been knocking on the door and probably will rightfully get a good look next year. I could afford Draper some time in the VFL, which would be nice. Tore up the sample in his 6 games for South Adelaide this year. Just that electrifying, explosive ball winner, good leadership traits. You think of your Zach Butters and your Chad Warners, that's the type of player you're getting in Sid Draper. And I think that's someone who Michael Voss would be licking his lips to have, adding to his midfield for the next few years.
Yep. Okay, so pick 5, Adelaide. They obviously in this scenario they miss out on Sid Draper, but they go with Harvey Langford.
Yeah, so this is where we're starting to see the ripple effect take place. Like, we're only up to pick 5, and while we do look at, other players, at the same time, some of the players they took in the first mock draft aren't available. So Harvey Langford, Adelaide, they want to add to their midfield, and I think they've got the right draft to do it in with their early selection. The type of midfielder, though, is going to be interesting for them. So do they back in the pace that they might find in Rankin, Soligo, Dawson, and then look for that different match-winning midfielder who's probably a bit bigger bodied, better in the air, So you think Jordan Dawson great in the air, Isaac Rankin great in the ground. Langford could have that nice mix in the middle. Can play a bit forward and potentially alleviate a player like Isaac Rankin to also play in both of those positions. But just had a stellar year. Langford, Lark medal winner, and just really rose with the standards when stepping up from Dandenong Stingrays to Vic Country. Solid for the AFL Academy as well, and got a run with Richmond's VFL program and looked pretty comfortable at that level. So Adelaide, I've been screaming out for probably a missing piece in their midfield, and if it's not Draper, Langford or a Jagger Smith could be one.
And pick 6, Melbourne taking Jagger Smith.
Yeah, so again, we're still in that top tier of midfielders falling to the first few clubs, and after taking Harvey Langford in our first mock draft, they look at probably a bit of a different midfield option, but it's Jagger Smith, who is a clean, composed, cunning, damaging ball winner. Averaged 30 plus touches in both the Talent League National Championships, went and played for Richmond's VFL and had 30 touches again there. Really great around the stoppage, positioning wise, movement, read of play. And maybe it's what he does with his possessions that might be a knock on him, but I still think this is a kid that could go pick 1, to be honest. So if you're Melbourne, you're sitting at pick 6, you're waiting to see who's available. If it's not a Langford or a Draper, it very well could be a Smith, and they'll be quite happy with that selection. And again, maybe a player who can go into a midfield that is just looking for something a bit different, a bit more spark. You factor in a player like him on the inside and Caleb Windsor on the outside. It's a pretty nice prospect to think about.
And pick 6, North Melbourne, which is traded from Richmond. So Alexander Taru from Oracle Industrials.
Yeah, so that pick 6, which turns into pick 7, that selection will definitely be part of any trade for pick 2.
Yeah,
there's no way that North Melbourne are trading out of pick 2 and finding themselves, in the back stages of the first round only.
Yeah.
And a lot of discussion around that potential trade is centered on the club's interest in Taru, who they're supposed to have very high interest in. Now we've said, I think for a few months now, that if North Melbourne wanted a key position player with their first pick, they don't need to be doing that with pick 2. They could be trading themselves back, getting multiple first round picks in, and getting access to a player like Taru in the 5 to 10 pick stage, and then ideally another pick later in the first round, which is the case in this trade with Richmond. So Taru, one of the big bolters in this year's draft campaign, really solid for Vic Country, but his Gippsland power performances were what caught the eye the most early into the season, and then consistency all the way through was really important. So high leaping, courageous, just throws his hands at just about everything and clunks a lot of them. So that was really great to see as an intercepting defender. Can play some good lockdown footy, but I think he'll be a really nice player to just come across the pack and really leave his mark. The other big tick for him this year was that because of his marking ability, they threw him forward, wanted to see what he could do as an attacker, and then forward half of the ball, forward half of the field, looked very comfortable and could kick straight as well, which was nice to see. So a swingman option, which ticks a lot of boxes for North Melbourne. I think more comfortable as a defender, but just given what the Roos currently have with their list demographic and all the kind of players they've been shifting between the forward line and the back line, he's one that could be an answer at either end of the field for them and just kind of give them some consistency while they've got Charlie Comben also doing the same.
Yep. Okay, so pick 8, St Kilda, same as the first mock draft. You're going with Josh Smiley.
Yeah, so as we mentioned in the kind of preview for this mock draft, there are going to be some over double ups. I think if you're St Kilda and Josh Smiley's available, it's going to be very, very hard to see them overlooking him. Just that match-winning, powerful midfielder that they've been craving for probably a decade.
Probably more.
They've had some misses early into the draft, and they would like to think this would be a hit. And if he is so, he's the kind of player they've been wanting to have for some time. Big, powerful, 195 centimeter midfielders don't grow on trees. And he is one who could have quite a quick impact at senior level. At the same time, I wouldn't be too stressed about him only being able to play midfield. I think you can throw him forward of the ball, even behind the ball a little bit. Can throw around his size, but a great ball winner, great scoreboard impact player. And I think he'd be a nice addition to Ross Lyon's midfield mix. Whether he has to play straight away though, I think you can still give him time in the reserves. Then when you factor in a potential future midfield of him, Windhager, Owens, Philippou, even Wanganeen Millera, do they consider putting him through? But when you've got a big bull like him in the middle, and your Jack Sinclair's out wide or your Wanganeen Miller is out wide, that's going to be a very nice kind of partnership for the Saints. So as mentioned, pardon me, he's going to be a great one to slide to pick 8 if he's available. Murphy Reed's another one who hasn't been picked up yet, so he might be one that they consider as well. But they have got 2 picks in a row, so we'll watch out and see what they do with pick 9.
All right, so pick 9 now. So this would be St Kilda. They're going to take Leonardo Lombard. Obviously, Gold Coast are going to match that and take him.
Yeah, in our first one, he went at pick 14. Pick 9, probably less happy for the Suns, but they'll have more than enough points to make sure that they get him through the door. And from the Saints' point of view, forcing a bid is quite a lively chance come draft night. I think whether it's with their first pick, second pick, whether it's Lombard, Isaac Kako, I think keep an eye on the Saints and see if they are happy to use one of their picks on a player tied elsewhere. For Lombard though, he's had a great 18 months. Making his VFL debut at 16 and going on to play in a VFL premiership with Gold Coast, and looking quite comfortable doing so as well. And then this year, again, returned to the VFL, had a stellar first game. I think it was against Richmond's VFL side. And then before the end of the year, he had a 20 disposal, 3-goal game. I think that might have been against Coburg. And then factor in, I think it was about 7 or 8 other games at that level. On top of that, took out the Lark medal for the Allies, sharing that with Harvey Langford. And then, some pretty strong numbers for Gold Coast's academy side as well. Powerful, quick, cunning midfielder. You'll hear that the Chad Warner, Zach Butters comparisons a lot, I think, with this draft class. Just because we've got a lot of these powerful, smart, speedy, attacking-minded midfielders, and he's one of them, and he's going to be a great fit. One of the players I really, really like in this year's draft.
Yep. They're making some good development in that Gold Coast Academy. All right, so that bid on Lombard pushes St Kilda down now to pick 10, where they take Toby Travalia.
Yeah, this might be a bit of a different one than what I think a few people were expecting. Now, in our first mock draft, they took Harry Armstrong, local key forward, certainly a list need there. Let's have a flip and look at something else that they might look at, and it's Travalia, who would be a dream recruit for Ross Lyon. Yep. Speed, dependable, run, carry, great in the air, good kick, exactly how Ross would like to play with that just run, constant, can slot in him at halfback, put him up on the wing. He'd be, perfect in their kind of game plan and how Ross likes to play. So if, the coach gets to kind of have a pick, you might look at Travalia at pick 10. There are going to be a few options for them at this junction of the draft as well. But I really like Travalia. Certainly deserves a top 10 pick if one comes his way. So, bit of a rise from a couple picks later in our first mock draft. And it's going to be interesting to see who the buyers are. If it's not St Kilda, Melbourne soon after. And then, maybe hard to go past Richmond, which is where he went in our first mock draft. But, such a clean defender who I think can quite quickly have an impact at AFL level.
So Melbourne now with pick 11, and they want to take Harry Armstrong, key forward, which I'm told by everybody is what Melbourne needs. I'm not that sold on it, but yeah.
It's an interesting one. I think they would certainly be looking at Armstrong, and that could be with their earlier pick. They'll be really hoping if they pass on him first that the Saints don't call his name, and it would be our chance, obviously, but there'll be a nervous couple of picks that they have to wait in between. I think a key forward would be good. We're yet to see Matt Jefferson at the top level, so he's a bit unproven. But what we saw from Jacob Van Rooyen with a year of development was really promising, and Jefferson's now had 2. Mm-hmm. But the Ds will know quite well, where he's at, and then if they make a move for Armstrong, that might be a sign. But then there's a future there. We can have all 3 in that forward line. That'd be quite frightening if they all reach kind of the potential that's set upon them. I think for Melbourne, they'll be quite happy if Armstrong is on the table, as mentioned. Nice goal kicking forward, just clean, good aerial presence, good leading patterns. And again, ideally maybe a player that they don't have to use straight away. So if Jefferson's at that level, they've got Petty, they've got Turner also working. He's afforded some time to kind of develop his craft and eventually break through for a debut. So it'd be a nice kind of player to have waiting in the wings.
Yep. So pick 12, this is where we see Richmond bid on someone I think we're going to be hearing a lot about, not just because he's going to be playing for Essendon, but he's just very exciting. So Isaac Kako at Essendon, Match Academy bid, small forward.
Yes, this is, I think, comes a couple picks later than our first mock draft, and that's probably the range is in that pick 8 to maybe 15 at the latest. So St Kilda are one that certainly could bid on him. Melbourne, maybe, even though they did the trade with Essendon. That would be quite interesting if that was the case. And then Richmond as well, with their kind of couple of picks in this part of the draft. But yeah, Essendon fans will be rapt to have him at the time when they need a small forward, and such a lively, high impact one is going to be great to see. He can manage to roll through the middle a little bit this year. Not that that'll be the case at Essendon, but a full year deep forward for him, whether it's at VFL level or AFL level, will be exciting to see. So that Essendon fans can certainly get excited.
All right, so Richmond with pick 13 now and taking Murphy Reid, midfielder.
Yeah, I guess a bit of a slider, particularly just compared to our first mock draft where we went pick 7 with Richmond. So it's actually a great outcome for the Tigers because obviously they traded out of that pick, and with their next selection in this one, he's still on the table. So that'd be great for them. Obviously another midfielder adding to the selections of Lawler and O'Sullivan, but 3 players who can offer a bit of a different mix, and you're not just getting the same 3 players through the door. But yeah, Reid would be maybe a bargain, some might say, at pick 13. He's probably got a bit of a wider range than most of the other midfielders at the top of the tree. But yeah, he's just a clever inside option who can certainly push on the outside, good agility, evasiveness, and some good forward craft when he's in front of the ball, which is I think where his career probably starts in the front half, and that's could be similar with a player like Lawler, whereas O'Sullivan I think you can probably have right in the middle quite quickly. So that like I said, you're getting a little bit different with Reid compared to the first 2 selections, and I think something that Richmond fans will consider is how many of these new guys do you play at once? Do you go full GWS Gold Coast expansion and just throw them in the deep end, or do you kind of assess which ones will be ready, which ones do you want to give more time, and which ones do you just want to experiment with a little bit? So I think Reid might be one that could wait a little bit. Same with maybe with Lawler, he'd be a fascinating one. But they've got I think 2, 3 more first round picks to come. So we'll see how they unfold and how that group as a whole probably works for them from 2025 onwards.
Yeah, hopefully they have that luxury. Pick 14, Richmond again, this time stealing Bo Allen from West Coast.
Yeah, this will hurt. Yeah, if this is what occurs on draft night, a selection before the Eagles are on the clock, and not to say the Eagles are definitely taking Bo Allen, but a player that they would love to have for sure. So in this case, the Tigers get him, and they get a pretty nice player who can play as a third tall defender, which is where he kind of started this year or in the back end of last year, and then had to go through the midfield for WA, and he was just stellar. Just one of the best performers at this year's national championships, just with his power, strength, smart work, and work rate. I think is certainly going to be important in what the clubs view in a player like him. So a midfield defender, versatile option. So again, people might think, another midfielder. But, he's very capable of playing at halfback, playing a bit taller if they want him to. Good push up onto the wing. They roamed through a few roles for Peel Thunder, who he ended up winning a waffle premiership with. So he's got that senior experience. And when we talk about the players that the Tigers could blood straight away, he's near the top of the list, I would think. So he's a player who's pretty much ready to go and can fill in a few spots, which is always helpful, especially when you look at Richmond's list and maybe some of the spots that they need to fill quite quickly. So yeah, nice little one for the Tigers to add to their mix of 3 more midfielders.
All right, so pick 15, West Coast. Obviously, missing out on Bo Allen, and then Xavier Lindsay next up. Yeah,
so obviously they look at a different kind of pool with Allen off the table, and Lindsay, who went at pick 18 to GWS in our first mock draft, comes up a few spots. And I think what West Coast will have a keen interest in is the type of player they get with Lindsay. Really, really good inside-outside midfielder. But I think where his future starts might be at halfback. You look at a Ruben Jimby and maybe the mixing and matching those two can offer 2 very different players, mind you. You're looking at more of like a Zach Merritt type with Xavier Lindsay. Good, clean left foot kick, penetrating kick as well. Good leadership qualities and a smart football player. So big country kid, hopefully links up with Harley Reid quite nicely, but then you add in your Elijah Hewitts, your Jimbys, hopefully Campbell Chester comes along a little bit more as well. And it's a nice little group that they've got from the last 2-3 drafts or so. And then, you'd be a really easy player to work with, I imagine, and which is what's going to be important when you've got Andrew McWalter at the helm and starting a new era at the club.
All right, pick 16, Port Adelaide, Luke Traynor, probably the first out-and-out key defender in the draft so far.
Yeah, and a bit of a slide. I went pick 11 to Melbourne in our first mock draft, and I probably have him in a top 10. It's just kind of how much do other clubs rate him and what the list needs. There's probably a little knock on him just given his series of concussions, and I think that's in the age and era we're in now. That's obviously going to be in the mind of just about any AFL scout, but at the same time, he's a safe pair of hands in a way, just with his interceptability, cleanliness, smooth mover. Think of Jordan Ridley and how well he can use the ball as well as play behind, and even lock down a little bit. Had some really good games for the AFL Academy. So that's against VFL opposition in Footscray and Coburg. Was probably the best across both games outside of maybe Levi Ashcroft. And I think that did his draft stocks really well. It's just the second half of the year had an interrupted season, but overall, one of my favourite players. I think Port Adelaide, at looking at pick 16, do they go for that? It very well could be the best player available, and like I said in my list, he probably is certainly at this point of the draft. But key position defenders and where their list's at. So they've got Alir, Radagalia, Zerk, Thatcher, but have they seen enough from that mix? Obviously, Radagalia was playing forward by the end of the year, and who have they got coming through? So they just lost a few key position players in Tom McCullum, Kyle Marshall, Tom Scully as delisting, so they quite haven't paid off because I don't think any of them managed to break through for a senior debut. So hopefully they find a bit more luck in a player like Luke Traynor.
Yeah, key defenders are very valuable, and if you're Port, very, very valuable. So Fremantle with their first pick 17, Joe Berry.
Yes, in our last one, we kind of addressed them on some front half spark, just that little bit extra live wire, goal sneak, ground level threat. We went with Taj Houghton, who could probably give him a bit more in midfield than what Berry can. But Berry's probably more of that out and out, small forward, speedy, clever, good goal sense type of player. And they'll be tossing up maybe one of those two at pick 17. So he's going to be an interesting one. He went at pick 21, so he was available to them in our first mock draft when we went with Houghton. But I think he's certainly going to be a name in their sights, one of the best goal kickers of this year's under 18 national championships, and as well with the Murray Bushrangers, who had just a stacked forward line this year. So just a really, really smart forward. And I think when you look at Michael Walters nearing retirement, Michael Frederick probably plays a bit more up the ground. So who have they got? Sam Switkowski is a good defensive option, but probably not a good goal return small forward. So do they look at someone like Joe Berry to kind of add to that mix on top of bringing in Shea Bolton?
Yep. So GWS with their first pick 18, Job Shanahan, who was picked 19 in their previous first mock draft.
Yeah, so he goes to GWS in both. Different selection, comes up one spot, given that they took Xavier Lindsay with this pick, who's now off the table in this mock draft. But Shanahan's the one who they will be crossing their fingers and toes that he's available. They're not screaming out for a key forward necessarily. Like they took Aaron Cameron, pick one. They've got a Coleman Medal winner in Jesse Hogan, although Hogan is getting on a little bit with age. Cal Brown probably struggled a little bit this year. Jake Riccardi's there. Like they've got good options overall. But I think what Shanahan can offer is a bit of versatility, can play both ends. I prefer him as a forward though. And he's a player who could come in and have a pretty quick say on things. Had a trio of games with Essendon's VFL program for a return of 11 goals. It's pretty handy when you're playing as an 18-year-old. But then you factor in his games with the Allies and his games with Bendigo Pioneers and the AFL Academy. Overall, just a really, really solid season that just picked up as it went. And I think they'll be hoping that form transitions into a pre-season and then maybe even early into round one next year or opening round if you're GWS. But just a clean, athletic, mobile, swingman option, but as I mentioned, maybe more of a key forward than anything.
All right, pick at 19, GWS again, Taj Houghton.
Yeah, one of the unfortunate stories of this year doing his ACL, and we had him going a couple picks earlier to Freo, and I think GWS will be certainly interested, just given he can be that quick player, and they certainly like their speed and in the front half more than anything. So he'd be afforded some time, which is important for him, after a long layoff. To probably come in, maybe get a VFL game or two in the back end of the season, and then ideally look at 2026 as the year that he really ramps up And as mentioned, GWS they're not screaming out for another small forward or half forward or midfielder that Houghton they're the kind of roles that Houghton could fill. So that's really, I think, important for him as well when they consider this pick, is that they're not going to be throwing him in earlier than what they would need to. Not that any club really would look to, but at the same time, you look at what they did with Darcy Jones and how well that's worked for them after he did his ACL early into his career with GWS, and then the slow build that he was able to be afforded before exploding onto the scene. So Houghton, he had 3 games for the Sandringham Dragons and so dominant, looking like a top 5 pick. So he's going to be considered one of the bargain buys on draft night if he slides this kind of far, just given the upside and the glimpse that we got to see earlier into the year before his unfortunate setback.
All right, pick at 20. So Western Bulldogs beating on Sam Marshall, and then obviously Brisbane matching it.
Yeah, it's something that happened a couple of years ago with Jasper Fletcher. I think it was about pick 13 or 14. Dogs swooped in, wanted to get him, and obviously tied to the Lions and forced their hand. Maybe earlier than what some we were expecting with Fletcher, but gee, that's turned out to be a very nice pick. And I think this is a very similar story with Sam Marshall. Probably the afterthought in some regard when you've got an Ashcroft brother also coming through. But you look at what Fletcher's been able to do, and I think Marshall could potentially replicate that coming in, despite coming into a premiership winning side. So he's just a clean, clever. Footy IQ is something big that I think Marshall possesses when you talk about smart footballers, good leadership traits, knows how to find the ball, and can step around and step through a contest quite nicely with some clean hands. So the bid itself, pick 20, I think the Lions would like it a bit later. Certainly could even come a bit earlier, but given that the Ashcroft bid came a little later in this mock draft, they might be okay. It might even out a little bit if this one comes in a bit earlier. So they'll make sure that they have the points. They probably will be scrambling a little bit to make sure that they do with Marshall, because I think what they've got at the moment is more than enough to get Ashcroft. But when that next bid comes in for Marshall, they might have to add a few picks in. So watch out for the Lions to be one of those clubs that do a bit more trading after their pick swap from last week with Collingwood. But if they have to go into deficit, which is unlikely, they'll be happy to do so if it means they're getting Marshall through the door.
Yeah. All right. So pick 21, Western Bulldogs, Cooper Hines.
Yeah, looking at the Dogs, there's probably like 3 areas that they'll focus on. And that's either front half threats, midfield depth, or ruck depth. They took Alex Dodson in the first one, who was the leading ruck prospect in many eyes. But then Hines is someone who can fill those other 2 groups. Midfield, forward, electric, pacey, good goal sense, scoreboard impact, powerful leadership qualities, co-captain of the Dandenong Stingrays this year, and had such a stellar season, going at 1.5 goals a game while, going at almost 24 touches as well. He was just prolific and finished very high in the Morris medal count. So yeah, I think he'd be a nice one for the Dogs to look at. Put him at half forward and just get a bit more spark in that forward line. Not that they're necessarily in it with when you've got Darcy, Ugle, Hagan, Waitman, Norton, but bit more energy, I think, might be what they're after. They looked at Charlie Clark a couple of years ago and he didn't quite pay off for them. I think Hines could be maybe a better option for them this time around.
All right, so pick at 22. This is North Melbourne, which would have been traded from Richmond in that trade, and Jonty Fall.
Yeah, just on the trade quickly. Obviously, they gave up some of the picks that they would have given up would be for 2 was 6 and 18 is what they got from Richmond. So they pushed back a little bit. With 4 bids, it's now at 22 overall. But I don't think North fans need to fret too much. They are still getting the 18th best player available to them. Mm-hmm. This is just falling back a few spots, meaning that not the draft points will matter too much. Less draft points used, pardon me. But Fall is hard-working key forward, which is certainly an area that they need to fill. They need support for Nick Larkey, and if they can kind of get someone in the middle of Larkey and Dersma, Fall could be a very good option. High leaping, high impact player. Injured with a back issue for the first half of the year and comes in and kicks almost close to 30 goals for the GWV Rebels. Just strong hands, like a vice-like grip when he gets his hands out in front, and some good leading patterns as well. So I think for North, bring in a key forward who they can develop. I don't think they want to play him straight away. Get him to kind of get some ticks in the VFL and look at it either if it's a Comben or a Teagle or whoever they're kind of moving through, or Will Dawson. Give them some time while they're still rebuilding, and then hopefully falls ready by the time they're shooting up the ladder.
All right, so pick 23, Sydney's first entry into the draft. Hamish Davis, probably the best photo for a draftee that we've got so far too.
Yeah, you can suss that as well on our mock draft if it's not behind us. But the first player who went unselected in our first mock draft comes in at pick 23 with the Swans, who are well known for just picking the best player available. You know, once they've got their list, they've got their system. Once they're on the clock, who's at the top of that? Usually that's the name that they'll run, and he's a great chance to be there. They took Cal Grind in the first mock draft, who's maybe more of a list need type, and we still see them taking a key position player and a forward half prospect in these two picks, just kind of inverted. We'll get to their other pick in a sec, but for Davis, really his purple patch of form with Claremont in the Waffle Seniors during their finals run was really what caught the eye of many. I think it was like a 20-3, 20-4 performance in one of those games. And just, for a player who's only at 190 centimeters, he's got a great leap and great marking ability. And doing that against senior opposition was certainly going to catch the eye. So when you think about, having him wait in the wings and work off someone like Will Hayward, that'd be really, really nice for him and for the Swans, I think. While he's ready to probably play at AFL level, probably might not have to, and that can usually be a benefit. When you've got these ready-made players, give them some good form in the VFL straight away would be nice. So, one for the Swans to consider with their opening pick. And as mentioned before, the first kind of player who went unselected, but will come into this mock draft and be a nice little addition.
Yep. Okay, so pick 24, Richmond again, this time Jack Whitlock.
Yeah, I think if Tigers fans were watching, they're probably screaming out, where are the key position players? When are we getting those in? And this is probably the time to strike. Having traded out pick 18, and the second half of the first round is where you'll probably find the key forwards, key defenders, and maybe a ruckman. And the Tigers have a few picks in that bracket. So this is where I think they start looking at more list needs after taking more midfielders, ball winners, flank options earlier in the draft. And Whitlock might be the best key forward available. We've taken Fall, Shanahan, and Armstrong ahead of him already, but I think that there is quite an even group after Armstrong. But I think Whitlock's upside is as high as any. So certainly going to be a nice one for the Tigers at 200 centimeters to add into a front half that's, whether they play Bolter, he probably might end up playing as a forward. Mm-hmm. But they bring Whitlock in. Does he end up playing as a backman? Tom Lynch has got a couple seasons left before he probably calls time. They've just got a few pieces that they need to figure out. But they found some good glimpses in like a player like Markelty Lafau this year. And I think for Whitlock, with having those kind of mature players in the forward line, just gives him time to settle into senior opposition, play a few games in the VFL. And like I said, that he might not be one that's ready immediately next year, but the Tigers will hopefully get a look at him. When you're already at 200 centimeters and you've got a great leap on you, good vertical, good marking, clean kicking, high impact forward. He'd be a nice one, and certainly suits a list need for the Tigers as well.
All right, pick 25, GWS, Harrison Oliver, another one that was unselected in your first mock draft.
Yeah, I think this will be a player, and again, if we go to the coaches and what they get to see from the tapes, who Adam Kingsley would love, just his competitiveness, work rate, and smarts as a back pocket, back flanker, can play lockdown, but also offer a nice boot coming out of defensive 50. So just a really switched on kid who just goes hard at the ball. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of player that Adam Kingsley would love to have. And you also think about his lockdown ability is what's a big tick for Oliver. And when you've got guys like a Whitfield and an Ash who are more the attacking guys, and that maybe also frees up a player like Connor Iden to play on those maybe taller forwards when you come up against a 3 tall forward line, or 4 tall forwards or 3.5, of however you want to deal with it. But again, not a player that they'll need straight away, and that's always good for the prospect coming through, that they can find that form in the VFL. And Oliver would be a pretty nice one for GWS at pick 25.
Right, pick 27, Sydney again. So Matt Whitlock this time, brother of Jack.
He's not as much as that out and out key forward as his brother is. Matt's more of a swingman option, maybe better seen as a key defender actually, just to show how good he is at both ends this year in the Talent League. He was named centre half back in the Team of the Year, but still kicked, I think he was top 10 for goals. So that's the kind of range that he can play. And for the Swans, what they've really tried to meddle with a little bit the last few years is finding key defenders. And then when they've looked to those key defenders, they've all usually been the kind of ones that can play either end of the ground. So Joel Hamlin came in as a defender, is now playing as a forward. Aaron Francis probably hasn't been the acquisition that they wanted. And they definitely need maybe an extra key defender in that pecking order. I think Whitlock will be one of the better ones, particularly on offer at pick 26 for the Swans in this late stage of the first round.
Pick 27, Richmond, Alex Dodson. I think the only ruckman so far.
Yeah. He probably is the standout ruckman. Logan Smith, who's tied to GWS, is probably the other one that could have a shot at number one. But when you're talking like for the whole, all 18 clubs and who they get access to, he's pretty much an outlier. And for Richmond, they would be considering him with one of their earlier picks. They'd be quite happy with him at 27 and adding to their ruck stocks. He's going to be a project player. Spent a lot of time playing basketball more than anything, so quite raw. But what he was able to show for South Australia this year was very nice in some glimpses. And then when you look at what Richmond need, and Toby Nankervis is in the later stages of his career, still got plenty of good football left in him, but they need to start thinking about who's that next man up. Is Samson Ride more a ruck forward and less of a just out and out ruckman? And Dobson, who is clean in being able to cover the ground quite nicely, works really, really hard. Good ruck craft overall, but you think like your Rowan Marshall and the kind of effort that he puts up right after the hit out in your working clearance, but also covering the ground like a Tim English as well. So they're the kind of players that Richmond would love to have, and then hopefully they get someone like that through Alex Dodson. So to end the first round, Tigers finish it off again, and they'll have the first pick of the second round as well. But pick 27, Dodson, that'll be exactly how they want to tick off that first round haul.
All right, so that's our first 27 picks. Now that's the first round. So who are some other players that might get a look into that first round, but we haven't named in this mock draft?
Yeah, there's going to be there could be a player we haven't named here who goes in the top 20. Like this is how even that kind of, I don't know how you want to see it, 10, maybe 12, 13 bracket onwards is quite tight. The kind of third tier level of prospect, and they're quite high. They'll probably be close to tier one in years gone by. So there's going to be a few here that we haven't named, but was certainly worth a mention. So Jesse Detoli went in our first mock draft. I think he went to Sydney with one of their later picks. He'll be certainly up there in a first round consideration. His Northern Knights teammate Thomas Sims might be a chance late into the first round if clubs are really keen on key forwards, and some of the names that we mentioned in the show are already off the board. He might be that next one coming through, as is Kale Garine, who went in our first mock draft as well, who's the other Swans pick. Nice dominant ruck forward who has quite a wide draft range, I think. So could go first round, could certainly go in the second or late second. And then a couple others. Ben Camporelli, I think Carlton fans will be keen to know when he goes. It's going to be pretty close to that pick 38 selection that they've got. So as we mentioned, they want to be seeing that selection advance its place in the queue as quick as it can through bids that swallow up all these picks that are ahead of them in the draft order. So he'll be on the fringe of the first round, but I'd be tipping second round and quite close to the 40 mark. Noel Miraz, who might have been considered a top 15 pick before he had a year that was mostly spent on the sidelines due to a foot injury. So nice athletic key defender who's pretty switched on. He could be one of those bargain ones just given he had the year off through injury. And then Christian Moraes, another one who was probably rated a bit higher, maybe even as early as a top 10 coming into the year, just maybe didn't have the year he wanted. Still put up solid numbers for either Vic Metro or the Eastern Rangers. Got to look in for both AFL Academy games and is very good inside-outside midfielder. And he'll certainly get a selection. There'll be a few of those clubs as early as pick 25, but maybe as late as pick 50 that look at him. So he's one of the ones as well that have these really wide draft ranges, and that could come as high as the last couple of picks in the first round.
Yep. Well, that wraps it up for the second edition mock draft. It's the 2024 AFL Draft. Lovely work, Mitch. So stay tuned on our YouTube channel. Next week at the draft, we'll be there. We'll be covering it live. We'll have all the presses for you, and we'll keep we'll get a mailbag going live on the socials. So keep an eye out on our Instagram page. Mitch, what do we have in terms of on site at zerohanger.com?
Yeah, all 18 club preview articles are up. So if you're kind of wanting a bit more depth on what your club could look at, not just at the top of the draft for their first pick, but certainly for those later picks, and you look at your Geelongs and your Collingwoods and clubs that don't have first round picks that we haven't been able to focus on through our mock drafts. We look at that and who they could be looking at with they're starting the draft in the 50s, but so who are the names and kind of list needs that they want to be filling in. So clubs, every club there for you on our draft page, player profiles for I think close to 40 prospects, and some still coming through. So there's heaps there, as well as all the news in the build up to next Wednesday and Thursday.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Mitch. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We really enjoyed reading all the comments from the last mock draft. It's a lot of feedback. I love the feedback on the Shark content.
Yeah, I think the draft's always good. There's so many people engaged who know their stuff. And it's so hard to predict this stuff. And mock draft's probably going to be totally wrong.
Yeah.
But I can't wait to figure out why. So,
well, this year I think is the first year in a while that we have. There's no you can't really predict it.
That's the other thing. There's not a lot easier to just know when everything's going to fall into place.
Yeah. But if this draft doesn't turn out as the second mock draft, you will hear from me.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely fair.
Absolutely. All right. See you next week.